If you have two little boys, one of them is called John and the other is called Robert, would you say John is politer than Robert, or John is more polite than Robert? Well, the answer to this question and much more about adjectives and adverbs will be in today's video. Welcome to a new episode on your channel Pure English. So in this video we will be talking about adjectives and adverbs, and precisely we will be talking about their comparative forms. What does that mean? It means the form of the adjective or the adverb that we use to make a comparison between one person and another, or one thing and another. For example, talking about the same two kids, when we say that Robert is taller than John, this means that we are using a comparative adjective. Where is the comparative adjective? It's taller than. So, because we are making a comparison about the height of the two boys, we are using the adjective tall, but we're not using it in its normal form, which is tall, but we are using it in its comparative form, which is taller than, because we're making a comparison between Robert as one person and John as another person. So we can conclude from that the comparative form of an adjective is made by adding the suffix er to the end of the adjective and then using the word than. Just like we said in the example, Robert is taller than John. But be careful, because not all adjectives take the er suffix. Adjectives which accept the er suffix are composed of one syllable, which means that they have only one vowel sound. In other words, or in a more direct way, if your adjective is not a long word, it's a short word, most probably, in order to make the comparative form of it, you need to add the suffix er to it, and then you add the word than. For example, we say quicker than, we say shorter than, we say longer than, and so on, because all these adjectives are short adjectives which consist of only one syllable, meaning that they have only one vowel sound. Quick, one syllable. Long, one syllable. Short, one syllable. So because they are all composed of one syllable, in order to make the comparative forms of them, we add the suffix er to their ends, and then we use the word than. Sometimes you want to express the comparison from the other way. For example, getting back to the very same sentence that we mentioned a couple of minutes ago about the two boys, Robert and John. If you want to say that John is shorter than Robert, because the original sentence was that Robert is taller than John, which means that John is shorter than Robert. But you can also express the same idea by saying that John is less tall than Robert. In this case, when you use less, you don't add er to the adjective, although it's composed of one syllable, although it's a comparison between one person and one person, which means a comparative. But still, because you are not talking about the higher, you're talking about the lower, which means less, you don't add any suffixes to the adjective. So the point I'm trying to make here is, in case of one-syllable adjectives. If you want to make a comparative out of that adjective, what you need to do is to add the suffix er to the end of the adjective and then use the word than. But if you want to talk about the comparison from the other angle, from the other side, from the side of the lower person or the less thing, you use the word less and you use the adjective without adding any suffixes to it. No er is added here. So you say, in the same example, John is less tall than Robert, rather than saying John is less taller than Robert, which would be wrong. There is a certain type of adjectives that doesn't take the er suffixes even if they are composed of one syllable. I'm talking here about participle adjectives. And participle adjectives are the adjectives which end either in ing, in the suffix ing, or they end in ed. For example, an adjective like boring, or another adjective like tired. You see, tired ends in ed, boring ends in ing. These two are participle adjectives and we cannot use them with the suffix er. In order to make the comparative form of these adjectives, you need to use more or less. More boring than, less boring than. More tired than, less tired than. Alright, another interesting point. We said earlier that if your adjective is composed of one syllable, you add er to it in order to make the comparative form. But we have 4 adjectives which act as exceptions. These adjectives are fun, real, right, wrong. These 4 adjectives, if you listen to them carefully, you will find that they are made of only one syllable. Fun, one syllable. Right, one syllable. Wrong, one syllable. Real, one syllable. One vowel sound in each of them. Okay, so normally, in order to make the comparative forms of these adjectives, we should add the suffix er. But that's not the case with these 4 adjectives. We use them with more or less. We don't add the suffix er to them. So we say, for example, football is more fun than tennis. We cannot say football is funner than tennis. This doesn't exist in English. You can also say your answer is more right than mine. I cannot say that your answer is righter than mine, although right as an adjective is composed of one syllable. So the point I'm trying to make here is that with these 4 adjectives, and although they are made of one syllable, but we cannot add the suffix er to them. And then we have another surprising piece of information. In a certain instance in English, you can use more with one syllable adjectives. These adjectives which are short, which are not very long or big words. Sometimes you use more with them instead of adding the suffix er. Why do we do that? We do that to add emphasis to the meaning of the sentence, to make the meaning stronger, to intensify the meaning, or to make it more emphatic. For example, we can say, you might think it's dark here, but it's even more dark in the cellar. Dark is one adjective that's composed of one syllable. You see, dark, one syllable, one vowel sound. So normally we should say, but it's even darker in the cellar, which would be fine. That would be amazing, no problem. It's still correct. But what I'm trying to say here is that in some cases, to add emphasis, to make the meaning stronger, you can use more with the one syllable adjective to make it more emphatic or stronger. So you can say, you might think it's dark here, but it's even more dark in the cellar. At the same time, you can use darker and say, but it's even darker in the cellar. Okay. What if the adjective is composed of 2 syllables, not only one? Like polite, and that's the adjective I used in my question at the beginning of the video. Should we say politer than, we add the suffix er, or should we use more and we say more polite than? Well, with 2-syllable adjectives, the 2 options are possible. So you can say, in the very first example we used, you can say Robert is politer than John, or Robert is more polite than John. Because polite, 2 syllables, polite. The word is composed of 2 syllables, and with 2-syllable adjectives, we can have the 2 options. We can use the er suffix, or we can use the word more before the adjective, which is composed of 2 syllables. However, there are certain cases where the 2-syllable adjectives cannot take the er suffix at all, and they have to be used with more or less. What are these cases? Number 1, if your adjective ends with the suffix full, F-U-L, or the suffix less, L-E-S-S. For example, an adjective like harmful, that's 2 syllables. Another adjective like careless, 2 syllables, careless. So these are 2-syllable adjectives, which means that normally we can use the er suffix with them, but actually there is no such a word in English as harmfuler or carelesser. These words do not exist in English. So we can only say more harmful than, less harmful than, more careless than, less careless than. You cannot use the er suffix with them because they are ending in the suffixes full and less. Another case in which we cannot add the suffix er is when your adjective begins with the letter a as a prefix. Let's talk about adjectives like alone, 2 syllables, alone. Another one, afraid. Another one, alert, another one, aware. All of these are adjectives composed of 2 syllables and beginning with the prefix a. We cannot use er with them, so there is no such a word in English as aloner or alerter or afraid. All of these words do not exist in English, but we say more or less alone than, more or less afraid than, more or less alert than, and so on. Also, if your adjectives end with OW or LY or Y, you have the 2 options possible. You can add the er suffix, or you can use more or less with the adjectives. For example, an adjective like early, 2 syllables, early. You can say earlier than or more early than. That's ending in a Y. Another adjective like shallow, 2 syllables. It's ending in OW. So you can say shallower than or more shallow than. Another adjective like friendly. That's an adjective ending in the suffix ly. You can say friendlier than or more friendly than. So if your 2-syllable adjective ends in y, ow, or ly, you can use the suffix er or you can use the word more in order to make the comparative forms of these adjectives. Sometimes when we make a comparison between one person and another, or between one thing and another, there is no difference between them. So they are equal, they are the same. So how do you express equality in English? You express the idea of equality using the following pattern. As, the word as, followed by the adjective or the adverb, followed by another time of the word as, a second as. For example, you say, Robert is as tall as John. You see, as tall as, which means as, adjective as. Also, you can say, Robert drives as slowly as John. There is an idea of equality here. So they drive as slowly as each other. As slowly is an adverb, and then the second as. So to express the notion of equality, we use this pattern: as plus adjective or adverb plus as. In order to negate this idea, which means to make the sentence negative, you just add the word not. So you say not as, adjective as, or you can replace the first as with the word so. So you say not so, adjective as. For example, the gap between the two sides is not so wide as it was, or is not as wide as it was. So if the sentence is negative, we have the word not here. You can say not so wide as, or not as wide as. Excellent. Sometimes you can make a modification to this expression by putting a singular countable noun inside it, and you precede it with a or an. How do we do that? Let's take this example. Despite his disability, he led as normal a life as any other person. So what happened here is that we use the pattern as, normal as, which is as, adjective as, but we placed a plus a singular noun after the adjective. So let me say the example again. Despite his disability, he led as normal a life as any other person, which means that he led a life that's as normal as the life of any other person. Also, there is a formal expression, or there is a group of formal expressions that I would like to mention here, which is using the words how or to, and you follow them by an adjective, then a or an, then a countable noun in the singular form. Let's have an example. How significant a role did he play in your life? So how significant, that's the adjective, a role, that's a plus the singular countable noun. How significant a role did he play in your life? This is a formal way of asking the question, how significant was the role that he played in your life? Another example for to, T-double-O, conspiracy is perhaps too strong a word, which means conspiracy is perhaps a too strong word. But we are formalizing the sentence here by using that formal pattern. Too strong a word, which means too plus the adjective strong plus a or an, which is a in this case, and then a singular countable noun, which is word. Right. Also, there is another expression which I would like to tell you about, which is using as many or much or little or few and then another as. So you use two as's, a first as and then a second as, and you put between them many or much if you are talking about a big number or a large amount, or little or few if you are talking about a small amount or a small number. For example, there are a small number of people involved, as few as 20. You see, as few as 20. So as few as, you cannot say as little as here because you're talking about people and people are countable, so we must use few. We will have a session or a video about countable and uncountable nouns soon on the channel. Another example, prices have increased by as much as 40%. You see, as much as 40%. We are talking here about the increase or the increment or the rise, and that's uncountable, and it's a big jump or a big leap, a big increase. So we use much and we say as much as 40%. And lastly, I'd like to finish this video by giving you examples on how to use to, which is TOO, and enough. Well, enough comes after the adjective or the adverb, whereas to is used before the adjective and the adverb. So, in case of enough, you have the adjective and or the adverb first, and then you follow it with enough. In case of to, you use the word to, TOO, you use it first, and then you follow it with the adjective or the adverb. And in both cases, you follow the two cases with the to infinitive. Let's have two examples to highlight these two rules. He didn't speak loudly enough to be heard. Loudly, that's the adverb, comes first, and then enough, he didn't speak loudly enough, and then the to infinitive, to be heard. The suitcase was too small to fit all my clothes. You see, the suitcase was too small. So to comes first, followed by the adjective, small, and then the to infinitive, to fit all my clothes. So enough is used after the adjective or the adverb, whereas to is placed before the adjective or the adverb, and in both cases we follow them with the to infinitive or the full infinitive. And you can replace the adverb enough with a formal alternative, which is sufficiently. So sufficiently is a formal alternative or a formal synonym for the adverb enough. But there is a little tweak that you should be aware of. So you say, she didn't play well enough to qualify. So as usual, well is the adverb, it comes first, and then it's followed by the word enough. But if you want to use sufficiently, sufficiently is placed before the adjective or the adverb. Not like enough. Enough is placed after the adjective or the adverb, whereas sufficiently is placed before them, just like the word to, which we have just talked about, TOO or TOO. So you say, she didn't play well enough to qualify, or you say, she didn't play sufficiently well. You see, sufficiently comes first. She didn't play sufficiently well, sufficiently, then the adverb, well, to qualify. And here we come to the end of today's lesson. I hope this lesson was useful for you, and if you like my content, please feel free to subscribe to the channel, interact with the videos by liking and sharing them to your family members and your friends and beloved ones, and stay tuned for our next lessons in our next episodes. Enjoy the rest of your day, my friends, and goodbye for now.